Good afternoon and welcome to FutureScape Virtual, the future of design and build. If I can ask the panelists to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about yourself and your company.
So I'm James Scott. I run the garden company. We're just about to celebrate our 30th year in business. I'm a registered member of the Society of Garden Designers, or we're a Barley contractor member, Barley designer members. We undertake design and build work. We also build for designers as an important part of our business as well, and we do maintenance. We employ about 20 people, of which 3 are part of the design team.
Fantastic, thank you. David?
My name's David Dodd. I am the owner of the Outdoor Room, as well as Pots and Pithoy. So we have been established with celebrating our silver anniversary, 25 years we've been working for, and we also have design and build. Like James, about 21, 22 staff, 3 of which are design. And we also work for many garden designers as well.
Fantastic. Pete?
Yeah, Pete Jones, Managing Director, Land Design Partnership Limited, based down in Kent. We are a complete construction company, so we don't carry out any design at all. We work in both the private and the commercial markets. Similar sort of numbers to James and David, really, 20 staff. We've been around just over 30 years. So yeah, that's predominantly based in the southeast.
Thank you. Rosemary?
Hi, I'm Rosemary Coldstream, company's Rosemary Coldstream Garden Design. I am a designer. I'm a registered member of the SGD and also accredited designer for Barley. I'm also on the board of Barley and the designer director role. I have a small company, small company, yes, and a small team of designers, and we largely do high-end residential, a little bit of work with property developers, and that sort of kind of commercial work. So, yeah, and I'm based in Hertfordshire and St Albans, but we work around all the counties, so anywhere it takes us.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So quite a good mix, 1 design, 1 build, and 2 design and build. So we'll kick off with a fairly, I would say, controversial question in the industry. So is design and build as a single company the way forward? What do you think? We'll start with you, David.
The way forward, no, I just see it as an alternative. I think there's very much a growing desire for design and build. I think it's always been part of the evolution of our company, but it's always gone alongside, combined, working with other designers, design practices of varying sizes, and landscape architects. So to say it's the way forward, I'm not sure. People want to work in different ways. So, you know, certain designers, they want a work-life balance, and you know, don't necessarily want that in-house sort of working for a company. But I think, like I say, we're sensing a very much, it's much more the American model of how landscape companies work, and that it's more prominent where designers are employed by the landscape, I won't say landscape contractors, but because they refer to them as just landscape companies. And like I say, the design is part of that company.
James, do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I certainly think design and build is not the only way forward. I think it's very much a choice. I think for my business, it's worked very well. But I think there's room for lots of different ways of working. I think that for clients do like it because it's a one-stop shop. Potentially they're dealing with one person throughout the process. But you know, like David, we work with many designers as well, and I think that that also is a process that works very well. And other clients will prefer, as they perhaps see it, to have a designer that's purely representing them. So I think both ways have got their advantages, and I certainly don't see it as a way forward. I see it that it will always be an important part of our business going forward, and it would work for some people, but for other people, I certainly wouldn't be advocating that designers should try and work as design builders in some way. I think you have to decide what fits for you, and I think that there's room and there's a need for both ways of working in the industry.
Yeah. Pete, is it something you've considered?
It's something that we dabbled with probably a few years ago, primarily in a commercial, on a commercial basis. But to be honest, it was difficult for us to I suppose, recruit to the right level to be able to do it to any great degree. And certainly at that time, investing in a design capability, if you like, wasn't something that I was really up for. We have considered it. Have we considered it since? No, we drew a line under it a while ago, actually based on comments from some designers about it and about how they viewed design and build, and how I thought maybe that might impact on our ability to generate and cultivate relationships with designers independently. So yeah, we made a decision a while ago to draw a line under it and if you like, stick to what we're good at. And build only.
That's a really good point. Rosemary, how do you feel about that from a garden designer's point of view?
Well, as a designer, we specialise in design. I wouldn't take on build as part of my company because I like to work independently for the client, and that way I feel I give the client what he wants. It doesn't mean to say there isn't scope for everything in the industry. It's just that's how I approach it, and my clients tend to approach it. It also means we can go out to tender and get in different quotes, and we're not sort of, it's not necessarily, I wouldn't say, there's a sort of misconception, maybe build companies, design and build, are working towards more build cost in a sense, which I think that we look at it from a design point of view, and that's not every company. So yeah, I think we concentrate on the design, we work independently for the client, and I think that's what my clients want. So, yeah.
How do you feel about working for a design and build company then? Does anyone put you off about that?
I mean, I have one of my contractors I use regularly as a design and build company. I think there are, and it's a very good relationship. I just think it depends on the company. One thing I do notice is that I don't get any referrals from that company, whereas if I'm working just with a landscaper, I will get them referring me to potential clients. So there's quite a difference there.
Well, that's interesting, because when we work as a contractor building for a designer, we're always really clear that any referrals that come through that project go to the designer, and we will often, if we even get a passerby and we get an email, I will normally copy, I've returned back and often copy the designer and just explain that this is a project by so and so, because we just feel that that's the way it ought to be. And if a client came back to us a few years later where we had built a garden for a designer, they may say, oh, we want some extra work. So we will always refer it back to the designer and say, talk to whoever in the first instance.
It's really nice to hear, James.
Mm.
Yeah.
I'd echo the same. I looked at, we had an inquiry last week, and it's a project we've just finished, and they've said, we really love it. Fortunately, it was a front garden. Really, really love the work, and just straight away refer it straight back to the designer. Mm. And I've just sort of, and they've contacted them, and the designer's very happy, and another project. But then we would then hopefully be asked a price for that work.
Yeah,
exactly.
Would you all make the same decision if your order books weren't so full?
I'm sure I would. Yeah, I would. Because the relationship with designer, I'm sure David's the same. We're just about to celebrate our 30th year, and I've got designers that I've worked with most years throughout those 30 years. Just from a I think it would be wrong not to do it anyway. But from a commercial point of view, you know, I want to be working with that designer for another, you know, I haven't got another 30 years left, but another, you know, 10 or so years, hopefully. So that relationship should be really important.
Yeah, I think that some of the toughest, some of the best working relationships the outdoor rooms bonded with designers has been during recessions and the tough times. So I think you have to keep that level of integrity all the time, and it will hopefully pay off in the future.
Would either of you, David or James, would you rather work solely on your own designed work? I mean, what are the benefits of working for other designers? David, did you want to take that first?
Interest. It's 100%. We want to combine working with other designers. Again, we work for designers of different abilities, different size practices. We work for landscape architects, which again is a completely different ballpark. And we find it fascinating how some of them not so good. We're working with a very young designer at the moment, and he has come along and he has openly said, I have no construction knowledge. I'll be looking to use you for tapping into your knowledge. And we've said, thank you so much for your honesty. You know, and he said that we inspire him. And this young whippersnapper is younger than my son. But he has, I find him so inspiring because his creativity is phenomenal. And I think, oh my word, this is going to be one for the future. With how and all of our staff are finding working with him really, really inspiring.
How about you, James?
I think that the balance is important for us. We really enjoy doing design and build projects, and there's a lot of satisfaction from that. From a business point of view, the work we do for designers is really important. We're often, you know, at capacity with design work. So having designers come to us with a project that's ready to tender for, that's an important source of work. But slightly more sort of holistically, over the years, I've worked with lots of designers, and I've you know, been fortunate to work with some, you know, really great designers, and I've just learned so much from them, the design schemes, you know, the way they work, their creativity, and you know, that's been one of the sort of great things about doing that. That's immensely helped my design and the design build side of our business, because, you know, we've been fortunate to work with so many really good designers, and without that, you know, we wouldn't have the design build business probably that we've got without that experience and influence of working with some really great designers, which if you're just doing design, the opportunity to work with other designers obviously isn't so great. So for me, that's been a really big benefit of doing both over the years.
I mean, Pete, as a contractor, how do you choose the designers that you work for? Is there a particular style that you go for, a particular type of design?
Not necessarily in terms of design or type of design. A lot of it is to do with locality and where they are in relation to where we're based. But I think as a contractor working with a you know, a standalone designer, it all comes down to relationship and whether or not it'll work. And I think you only find that out when you start working together. And it's pretty apparent very quickly whether or not it's going to be something that you can both work with. And yeah, and then it's about growing that together and making it work for you both. We don't go for a certain style of project. It's try and adopt each project on its merit, really. And I'd adopt that for value as well. When people say, oh, what value do you know, what sort of value project do you want to do? And it's always about, they will say, oh, you know, would you consider something under X or is it only over Y? Well, actually, it's yeah, each job on its merit, and so it's yeah, if it ticks the boxes in, you know, and interests you and lights your fire, I suppose, then it's irrelevant in some ways who's designed it and what it is. But yeah, we don't generally as I say, we don't choose on type of project. It has to be down to communication and relationship for us, really.
So independent basis.
Yeah.
How about you, Rosie, for choosing a contractor?
Yeah, quite similar. It's on an independent basis, and it will be sort of matching a contractor to the job and to the client. So depending on the level of complexity in the job and the sort of level of the company, then, you know, if it's a small job, then a company that doesn't have as many teams or as big, or doesn't have as such a big skill set, maybe doesn't do water features and things like that, then that's more suitable. When it comes into jobs, you know, when you're getting into the hundreds of thousands, I know I need a sort of, you know, a bigger, more established company that can deal with that. And also sometimes clients can be tricky, and you've got to have a build company that has the backup in the office to deal with all of that as well. So yeah, each job is individual, but again, communication and that relationship and working, you know, with those through the years is so important.
Do you mostly use long-standing contractors, or would you look to use new contractors as well?
Well, yeah, for a long while I've used sort of the same contractors for many years, but because things are so busy, I'm looking to forge new relationships, and I've used a few new contractors this year, and that's been really good and refreshing. And it's you know, it's exciting to do that. You know, you can get stuck in a rut, but
Yeah. Absolutely. So Pete, is there a certain value of project where you feel it might not be necessary to engage with a garden designer?
I suppose this might come down to, yeah, project value, but it'll come down to maybe the client's perception of value in terms of design fee, I suppose, for me, and whether or not actually they see a large proportion of a smaller budget, if you like, they'll go to design. And in some ways, the client needs to be up for that spend, regardless of the project value, because they need the right solution. And so, yeah, I suppose it's a tough question. I suppose the argument is that design and build company might be able to deliver it without such a large design fee. I suppose that leads on to another whole discussion. But whether or not there's a value that you should, you know, draw the line at, I don't know. Again, I think it's down to the client and whether or not they value it, you know, and they're willing to spend the money regardless of the budget. To be honest, I think you always need a designer, a separate designer, and that's why we do things the way we do. But the people around the table virtually here will have very valid points and are very successful at what they do. So clearly it works. But for me, yeah, I think, yeah, I don't think there's a need to draw a line for a budget, and whether you need one or not. It's got to be the best solution for the client, and that has to be the driver for me.
What do you think, David?
I don't think it's necessarily down to budget at all. I think it's more to do with the technical content and the complexity of a project. You know, if someone said, you know, we want a new rectangular patio, you know, even if it's sort of 100 to 300 square meters of paving, you know, it might be quite a substantial budget, but doesn't necessarily need, you know, a full, if you, and this is the advantage with, I think, design and build can make that call possibly slightly more easily, in the sense that, you know, we've got the capacity to measure out, look at the project for its own merit, and say, you know, showing samples, what do you think will go with the property, etc., etc. But again, a designer in that sort of instance may well turn around and say, well, actually, you can steer them away from that, and you can give them something more creative and more interesting. So it's usually to do with when a client has just definitely made their mind up. They just want an area paving, or they just want a wall building. Whether or not we need a structural engineer is another point you have to look at. So does it need designing? Do we need structural engineers? And all these other third parties which may need to be involved. So like I say, it's not really a budget necessarily, it's more to do with the technical content.
Would you say the same, James?
I think that the design is always really important. The sort of difficult conundrum is how much of that, if there is a budget, how much of it can you spend on design and still get something that's buildable. But as I say, I think the actual design aspect is critical, and a good designer can design a huge amount of value into a scheme. So you can design great aesthetics that aren't necessarily expensive to build, and a good designer will balance that and make the best use of a client's budget. So I think a designer should always be involved. Whether that does lead, maybe there might be a saving to the client if they're using a design build contractor, but not necessarily. Probably the client can't go to the most eminent designer in the country because they're not going to have the budget. But I've just had the privilege of judging for Pro Landscaper, the design awards, and so these are for gardens built total cost under £25,000, and the schemes that I've just been looking at are absolutely fantastic, and without a doubt the great value in those have been provided by the designer, what the designers brought to the table. And I believe in all the ones with all the finalists, they were all, I think, separate designers to contractors. I don't think there are any design builders in there, and they're all relatively low budget schemes, but very well designed.
What would you say, Rosemary?
Well, being a designer, I would say you always need a designer involved, because I think we add something different to it. But it is that, clients don't always value spending money on a design or value the design. So, and then, sometimes I've said to people, maybe you're more suited to go to just a landscape or a design and build if you don't want to invest the time and the money into it. But I think, being a designer, I think you always get a much better result if there's a design involved, even just for a rectangular patio. It doesn't have to be a rectangle. But I get your point, David.
But sometimes they can't be told, Rosemary, and if that's what you want, then all right, then.
That's when they don't value it, and you just go, fine.
I think. Sorry for interrupting. I think the biggest sort of one of the biggest scourges of our industry is design and build companies who completely undervalue the design, and I think that it's a real problem we've got. Yeah, we'll design. And I see companies and they'll say, we can do you a design for a couple of £100, or if you go ahead with the build, then the design work is free. That benefits absolutely no one. And I think that's a point I really wanted to make. And yeah, I think it's a great profession, and I think how dare you undermine the value of good design?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
Question also whether they're actually really getting a design for that. It's not. So
yeah, interesting. Pete, do you think that design and build companies have an advantage in terms of how clients might see them, or
in terms of cost or generally?
In terms of cost.
David's just hit the nail on the head, really, and a lot of my notes before this were around devaluing design, I guess, and putting across figures to clients that would be put against design fees for a loan designer that just wouldn't compare. And so, on that, I completely agree with what David said. So, have they got an advantage? Yeah, probably to some degree. If you put them up against each other. But I don't know, that it's really tough, because, as I said earlier, the two design and build companies here are very good at what they do, and they have a very good reputation, and they do it very well, and their company ethos is exactly where it should be. But unfortunately, not everyone's like that, and so they, as always, the people who aren't like that will give a poor reflection on design and build, when actually it's probably slightly unfair to a degree. If it's done right, it'll work. But yeah, whether they have an advantage, I don't know. Maybe. No, probably. Yes and no, I suppose. Yes and no.
Yeah, interesting. James and David, so what benefits do you think that you can offer designers by also having that design element of your business? James, did you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think I understand designers that are reticent about approaching working with a company that also does design, but we draw a very sort of clear line with that. And I think what we can add as designers, as well as contractors, is that we do have a really good understanding of the design process, that relationship between the client and the designer, which is really important. We would always be looking to support that relationship and making sure we are playing that supporting role. We're very free with information. We have over 30 years got quite a lot of experience with our design side. We've also solved quite a lot of design problems over the years, and if we can help in any way, sometimes we might share working drawings from previous projects and things to sort of help with a solution if we're involved early enough at a project. But we very much see it as a role to support that designer and make sure we defer to them in the right places, and that the communication is always sort of in the correct line, not tread on the designer's toes, and but it's also about really sort of trying to understand the detail of what the designer's trying to achieve, and then making sure that we achieve those details, partly because we know how frustrating it is if we've done a design and it's not faithfully carried out. I just went to see a project that we designed last week, and I didn't actually even know it had been built. The client had taken it, had somebody else build it, and the only reason I knew it had been built over lockdown was because they came to us and said, "Oh, could we do the planting plan now?" So I went along to have a look, and the essence of it was there, but actually quite a bit of the little bits of detailing were missing. Some of the the jointing, the timber work details that we'd worked out quite carefully just hadn't been done faithfully, and it was frustrating, and it just wasn't as good as it could have been. And so if we're working with a designer, we would sort of bring that to the table, really, that we'll be just as sensitive to their detail and so on as we would with our own projects.
Is that the same for you, David?
Absolutely. I mean, I think with design and build, the advantage of, how we see it is our biggest advantage of it is where the designer and the landscaper become the team, and there is this all in package, and the designer has this absolutely on tap pool of construction knowledge, which they can use all the time, and that is so critical at concepts phase, because we find so much time wasted where we've given designs and then you discover that it's either not achievable, logistically it's not achievable, or it's way out of budget. And we've gone along, looked at projects, been told that there's a decent budget, gone along, looked at projects, and it's actually just not happened, and we're saying, no, this project is not going to get off the ground. But working, again, when we work with certain designers, you have this wonderful, you can form this wonderful relationship and work in a very similar way to how we work with our own in-house designers as well. And I completely agree with I think what's been said of these designers who don't want to work with us because we have design. I think it's almost, I don't get it at all. And it's as James said, we want to help make this garden. This is a fantastic concept. This is a fantastic design. We want to realise this. And so we will gladly work with designers in the same level as we do work in-house.
Pete, what are your thoughts on that then?
Yeah, David's right, actually, sadly, in terms of them having an in-house construction capability and advice line, if you like. But personally, I think that should be there for a contractor and designer independently. If if they're working independently, it should be there. If the communication and relationship's right, there should be the ability to swap information and and help each other out. That's what it should be about. One point that Dave made was timing, really, about the involvement of the contractor, and their design and build, I guess, are there from day one. And I think for a successful relationship with a separate designer and contractor, there has to be involvement as early as possible. It's almost too late once you have a full design drawn up. It's almost too late to then send it to the contractor that you work with. The discussions should and can be around the table very early on, I think. And it's always, even if it's going out to tender, I think any contractor really who values the relationship with their designers should be happy to sit around a table early doors and discuss construction detailing if necessary, and potential cost implications if the designer needs support. A lot of them don't. But yeah, it's all about being able to share ideas and help and have open discussion about budgets and construction detailing. And I don't see any reason why that can't be done by separate contractors and designers. I think if the relationship's right, it should be fine. So yeah, it's all about timing for me, that really.
Would you agree with that, Rosemary?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because I work with both design and build and just build companies, it is about that communication for either of them. And I don't see that I'm, I see the relationships as being the same, really. I do talk to contractors early on certain projects. Construction detailing, I mean, I think designers need to learn more about that anyway, and about the costs of things. I mean, I think that's, something that a good designer should know about, so that they are not designing something that's impossible to the client's budget. But I think, yeah, I mean, I actually can't see a difference between the relationships I've got with the design and build company I work with regularly and with the landscaper. They both respect the designer's role on site and are very, know that things need to probably go through the designer sometimes, but it's a working partnership. And that's how we work, as David said, as a team. And then understanding, tapping into a contractor's construction knowledge where yours is lacking is a great idea. I always ask questions. So.
I've got a question for Pete, actually, just a comment you made, Pete, about sitting around the table discussing construction, even if it's out to tender. And I personally wouldn't do that until we know that we've won the tender. And so I'm wondering what you think about that, because we have had instances where we've given a lot of technical knowledge to a project and then it's been awarded to someone else. And I'm thinking, well, I've just given away a lot of, valuable information and my knowledge, which any designer or architect would expect to be paid for. I've given away that free, and that again is, don't give anything. The best thing any designer or contractor has got is knowledge, and that's why I hate seeing design undervalued. Because I think the client's not paying for a bit of paper, they're paying for creativity and they're paying for brains. And so that's my view. I wouldn't be sat round. I might phone up and ask questions as to how they want something building, but I actually wouldn't give that information free.
I mean, I suppose I'm looking at it in terms of a long game, if you like, with a relationship with the designer. It's really, I suppose, being there as a sounding board whenever needed, I guess. And I completely agree with you that how much intellectual property, I guess, do we give away for free just in advice probably on a daily basis, which we probably should charge for. But yeah, and I agree with that. I think especially when designers are new to the industry, or maybe there could be a lack of confidence there. I think viewing things around the table at early stages, regardless of whether it's a tender situation or you're likely to secure it, then without tender, then I suppose I see it as a bit of a helping hand to people, and hopefully that'll cultivate, enable me to cultivate the relationship later on. But yeah, it's really just about trying to work together. But I do agree with you. There is there is a level that you probably need to draw the line at. But no, yeah, I am happy to sit around the table. But yeah.
I mean, if we've won the job, I'm all yours, baby. You know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
you know, that is all free, and that's part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely.
So final question from me is, do you think suppliers find it better working with designers who specify the products or landscapers who install the products? I'll start with you, David.
Daft question. Sorry, Nina. I think it's a bizarre question. I don't know what you mean by better. Both sides bring positives. Designers understand the products they want to use, but is that product, a contractor might say, yeah, it might look great, it's not fit for purpose. You know, there's no way you're having that timber barbecue. I didn't quite understand the question in the sense that what do suppliers prefer. I think, like I say, everyone brings something to the party. I mean, again, I think designers and architects supply, well, architects don't supply. That's a whole nother topic. But let's not forget, supply means liability.
Yeah, very, very true. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so to jump in, I think it also depends when you're talking about a supplier, whether it's a supplier that's supplying a generic product or a bespoke product, because I think if it's a bespoke product, the supplier probably invests quite a lot of time talking to designers and getting designers to understand their product. And then if it's suitable for a scheme, it can get specified, and then the contractor will use it. If it's something that's just, you know, regional, that's, you know, if you're a regional supplier, then I don't think it really matters. You're probably more likely to want to be on the books of all the contractors to get your product supplied if you're basically a stockist. But if you're, you know, if you're a bespoke designer of something that gets used in landscapes, then really designers is the way you should be going, and you know, talking to those and getting your products in front of the designers.
Can I add to that? Because I think, you know, with, say, paving, it's good for a designer to have somebody within a paving supply company to talk to and ask questions and, you know, find out what's new, and, you know, and also just sort of see the possibilities of items. You know, you know, if they're not even going to order it, the contractor orders it, I don't think that matters. I think it's having that communication so that the designer understands what they're specifying in full before they specify it, will make sort of life easier. So yeah, I mean, yeah, and bespoke things, obviously you've got to work closely with the designer of that bespoke item.
Yeah, it's a really good point. What do you think, Pete?
Yeah, I think a little bit like David. I think I thought we could do with the supplier to answer that, really.
Pots.
Yeah, what do you think, David? Yeah. And I suppose there are what do I think? Yeah, specification, I suppose. If a designer specifies a product, and as Rosemary rightly says, you know, if there's discussions had at an early stage with suppliers, that's great, and that outlines exactly what they want at the end of the day. As for having it delivered, calling it off, doing, you know, in terms of the operational side of it, maybe it's better that the landscapers or the contractors, whoever they might be, deal with it at that point. I suppose the suppliers might like both. I guess they might see benefits in working with both. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that they might. Well, I don't know. I suppose they're interested in who's paying the bill. I suppose.
I've got to say, from a commercial point of view, as a supplier, you know, we've just become Barley affiliate. Pots and Pithor has become Barley affiliate members, and I'll be 100% honest. We don't care, as long as we give trade discounts, and that's to both designers and contractors. So but from a supply point of view, we'll take anyone's money. But it's true. So that's personally, sorry Nina, that's why I found it a bit of a bizarre question. Who's better? It's money's money.
Yeah, understandable. How about from a contractor's point of view then? Would you rather deal with a supplier directly, or I mean, how would you normally?
I've always advocated the liability of everything. If one party's supplied something and then someone else has installed it, and it's not always the case that we want to supply. We've got a project coming up, and there's been quite a lot of tree failures, and they were planted by the nursery who supplied the trees, or the designer supplied the trees, I don't know. But we've been asked to now dig the pits and then sort of put in drainage around. I said, I want absolutely nothing to do with it, because we're not supplying. Therefore, the liability, well, hang on a sec, how were those pits dug? How were they prepared? Etc. etc. And so, it's not always a case of we want to supply, but we will. But 9 out of 10 times we will want to supply. And again, like I say, paving, I'm looking, Rosemary talked about, new products coming on the market. I'm seeing so many faults with new products, and the sort of all the different techniques for laying paving now. And I think it's because we're getting a lot of inferior quality building products coming onto the market. And I'm actually sort of quite saying, yeah, I wouldn't recommend that. But there has to be a point where the person who supplied it is liable for it.
So should there then be that discussion, I suppose, between contractor and designer in terms of the products you're looking to use?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I think that the thorny issue is the plant supply, which varies across the industry as well, from designers and contractors. And I think you have to be very clear if you're supplying plants with your, as a designer, with your contractor about the liability if something goes wrong, and have that discussion before you do it by a plant, basically.
We work for so many designers who supply plants, and I've got too long in the tooth to worry about it now, but 100% agree, Rosemary. It's just that liability issue that, if the project's been signed off and the planting's been done to a good specification, then any fatalities after that is down to whoever supplied.
Depending on, ground conditions, as long as it's signed off, yes.
Yeah.
It's gardens, there's water, there's things go wrong.
Isn't it? It's all about where does the responsibility lie, and if the contractor has supplied and planted, it's clear that there's no shop. For me, that's absolutely the better way to do it. But I also completely understand that there is a margin to be had on plants, and maybe for particularly a designer who's sort of finding their feet in the industry, it's a really big temptation to make the margin on the plants and supply them. So I do completely understand that. I don't think it's the better way to do it, but I certainly understand why it's done like that.
I mean, to that, I supply plants a lot on most of my jobs, but it's not every job, and it really does depend also on the job, the element of risk and the liability. And I think sometimes it is better that it is all in one house, as with not having separate contractors coming in to do different things. But yeah, I think it is, I do think designers should supply plants if they want to, but I think you have to be fully aware of where your liability lies. So, yeah.
I think it goes back, Nina, to the questions about why we like working with designers as well as, and it is, all designers work in different practices. I mean, it's quite an unregulated industry in the sense that they can do that for good or bad. But I mean, I think, we work with one design practice, quite a well-known one, and they make sure that if they're supplying the plants, the contractor has profits and overheads accounted for this. So it's like, what markup would you be making on these plants? And has that been considered? And they sell a full bill of quantities, and the box is there to fill in as to what you want your profits and overheads to be on them supplying the material. which is interesting. Another one we have is they want an insurance. They supply the plants. They want us to guarantee them. But again, in the bill of quantities, there's a box to fill in for what is the insurance for the success of those plants.
Interesting way of doing it.
Yeah, that is. I mean, how can you then, I suppose, can you tackle that?
I mean, they make one for huge trees being craned into a garden in West London. That was all done. There was a £20,000 insurance, because we're talking 13 grand a pop road closure. So if one of those trees died, there's a £20,000 insurance. After 1 year, 50% with no fatalities or problems, then 50% of that is returned to the client. So if there is a fatality, then that money is used to replace any trees.
Did anyone have anything else to add on that point? No? In that case, we'll now take questions from the audience. Thank you for watching the seminar, and thank you for joining us for the questions afterwards as well. I know that David and actually a few of you have been answering questions throughout on the side panel, but we'll put a few of your questions to the panel as well on here. We'll start with one at the top here. Do design and build companies charge a reasonable fee for their design service, or do they undercharge to get the project and make the profit with the build? James, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. We treat it completely separately. So we expect our design service to stand alone as its own little business. It is definitely a route to market for us, because we want to design gardens and build them, and that's a core of our business, along with building for other designers. And we make it really clear. We're often asked if the project goes to a build, will we refund the design fee? But we don't, and we just make it clear it's really separate. And we charge, I think, reasonable industry standard design fees. Where a client potentially can save a bit is that once we go into a project, we've got the management cost of building that project, and I don't really see that being different if we're contract managing the project for another designer, or we're overseeing it as a design build contract. So we don't have to charge any additional overseeing fees for the client. So you don't have the situation where you've got the contractor who's got their overheads factored in for the management and a designer charging fees as well. So it can be a bit of a saving for the client, but not a refund.
We've also had someone ask, what is the most important thing that designers can do as part of a tendering process?
Yeah. I think I have to turn this off.
I think we've got David on.
Yes, where?
Sorry. Wait, David.
Yeah.
I've just popped David on mute. How can you then? Rosemary, sorry, did you want to take the question? It was, what is the most important thing that designers can do as part of the tendering process?
Yeah, well, I think in the, I saw in the questions, David or somebody put bill of quants. I think that's important. I think a clear specification, a clear scope of works, itemize it out, don't lump things in together, and ask your contractors to quote as clearly as possible against those, so that then you can compare like for like. Because it's quite difficult if one contractor's lumped a huge amount in together and another hasn't, then to separate it out. I mean, there is, of course, the danger that the client will go, well, that person's more expensive than that. And you've always got to look at the bottom line and remind them of that, because, if you've chosen your tender process carefully, they should come out fairly similar. But the bill of quants is a very important thing to have as well, because that means they're not relying on measuring off the plan, and in a sense, and so that they are quoting against the same thing. So yeah.
There's been quite a bit on the chat about bill of quantities on here, and I see that David has been tackling a few of those questions. David, are you on now?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Where's my video? There's a line going through video.
If you press that button, you should be able to get video up. Just press the one that's got the line through it.
Yeah, nothing's happening. Anyway, sorry. It's because I was watching it on the other channel, or wherever it was. So I might have to click off that. And then this is live now, is it?
It is, yes.
Oh, sorry, everyone listening. I'll try and find myself. Yes, bill of quantities. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, we've had quite a few questions about it, quite a few comments, and I saw that you've been answering a few. I just wonder whether you can kind of sum up what you've said.
Yeah, I mean, the bill of quantities, it's I think sort of, I don't think it's particularly well taught at some of the colleges. The number of people coming out into the design industry don't seem to have any idea of what a bill of quantities is or how they go about setting it out. Bearing in mind, most designs are done on computer now, either Vectorworks, SketchUp, CAD. There's no reason why those areas can't be measured, and it's essentially saying what you want pricing. If it goes out to tender, there should always be a bill of quantities. In respect that, if you want apples for apples, if you're just sending a plan and a specification, well, that's very well telling me how you want it paving, but there needs to be detail, there needs to be correct, the specification should be saying how something is built, and then the bill of quantities is just then taking that and literally quantifying it and saying how much of it is going to be built. And therefore, it should just be a basic Excel document, and with a description, a unit rate, an item, and then a total, an area, and then a total, and then it just adds up at the bottom, and that's your quotation done.
Do you feel the same way, Pete?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just David was quicker on the answering the questions on the other feed than I was, but yeah, absolutely, it's really key for a number of reasons. Really, it does enable like for like tendering, apples for apples, as David said, and that's a really big important factor about tendering. Let's make the playing field as even as we can. It does away with that time. All the time of going through tenders for the client and for whoever's evaluating them at the time to understand what people have allowed for, whether they haven't included things, and there's a lot of time there that can be, you know, time wasting that can be eliminated just by putting it all up front, and I think it just adds clarity to the whole pricing of the project. It's ideal. And I think it is definitely the way forward. That needs to sit with a decent and full specification. Without that, bill of quantities is as useless as anything. So it needs a full spec, detailed, and it needs the bill of quants alongside it. That's the ideal situation, to be honest. So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree.
Thanks. I hope that's helped to answer the questions around that. We've got another one here that says, as a contractor, I often turn down more complex projects because of the time involved in pricing can be so onerous without any guarantee of the prospect becoming a client. Any tips on how you decide which schemes are worth the time and the effort to bid on? I think we've touched a little bit about this throughout the seminar, but not much. So Pete, did you want to take that one first?
So how do we decide which jobs we tender for and which ones we don't? Yeah, okay, based on the chances of whether we're going to get them or not. Honestly, I think at some point you have to dip your toe in and have a go at pricing something that is a little bit more complex and put yourself out there and take a flyer. You've got to invest the time at some point, otherwise you never will. So I would suggest that you give it a go, put the time in, and see where it goes. you'll probably be overcautious the first time you do it anyway. So you'll be all right if you do win it, I should imagine. But no, I would encourage you to have a go. How do we decide now? I guess experience gives you the knowledge to be able to know whether it's worth pricing or not. We are fortunate enough to work with designers who we would like to do all of their work. So it's, you know, we don't have to, it's very rare that we look at a project and say we don't want to price it. The only time we wouldn't now is workload and whether or not the client just can't wait for us to be able to deliver it. That would be the major factor for us. But yeah, otherwise we'll price most things for the designers that we work closely with anyway. So yeah, it's not too difficult for us, fortunately.
What about you, James? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think I agree with just about everything Pete said. If it's a designer that we work with, we will start out really wanting to tender for the project. We do have quite a sort of informal, what we call a sort of bid no bid procedure that we go through, and there are certain things that we just won't bid for. For instance, we get probably several inquiries a week from a builder tendering for a project with a landscape package attached, and to be honest, we wouldn't bother with that. So we like it to be for people we know. Interestingly, sometimes when it's more complex and more difficult, that makes it more interesting for us because we sort of know there are probably less people that would do it, and we're possibly more prepared to put time in for a project that's a little bit more complex, perhaps. Because we think if we put the time, we actually might be more likely to win it. But I think somebody famously said, maybe in the advertising industry, that half my time is wasted. Unfortunately, I don't know which half. That really applies to tendering. That you've got to put tenders out there, and you don't know whether you're going to win them or not. We find it frustrating if we've given a time scale that we're available in, and then the contract is given to somebody else because they can start it much quicker, because it is a lot of work tendering. Yeah, I think it's about, you know, trying to work with people that you know and you've worked with before, and as Pete says, you know, you've got to get out there and you have to tender for things. We love to be in a position where we're a preferred tenderer, and that does happen. And when that is the case, we're often much more comfortable at getting much more involved early in a project, visiting the site at a design stage, giving free advice to the designer. That becomes a little bit more, it feels like more of a conflict if you know it's then going out to 4 or 5 other people to price once you've done that. But so I think sort of partnering is a good way forward, and it can benefit the client, but it's perhaps a bit more of a difficult sell to the client.
From the design side, Rosemary, how do you feel about that? I mean, what would you say to people tendering on your project, so to know it's the right kind of project for them or not?
Well, I try and sort of match the project up to the contractors for a start, thinking about sort of the level of detail in it, as I think I said in the talk. I think one thing is always to be honest throughout the tender process with your contractors, and tell them that they're up for tender against 2 others or whatever. Some, you know, whether it's right to tell them who that is, you know, sometimes afterwards, maybe through the tender process. I mean, if you know them well, you can easily tell them who they're up against. And I would also think following up afterwards, if they didn't win the tender, it's really important to tell them why, and to just keep that communication open in that respect there on both sides, saying these are the reasons why you didn't succeed, but let's try again on another job. So, yeah.
That's really interesting. The contractors on here, then would you ask for feedback as to why you didn't get the tender, or would you just move on to the next one?
We would often ask for feedback. Yeah. You know, whether it's on price, you know, often it is price, of course, that's understandable, but it can be other aspects as well. So yeah, we'd always look for feedback.
A few comments have spoken about whether in design and build companies the design aspect is or can be undervalued. How would you feel about that, David?
About the
design being undervalued within design and build companies?
I mean, I'm horrified when I hear stories of I mean, we have a minimum budget for design, and we're going into the thousands because it's professionally done, it's professionally set out, it's professionally executed. And I think, therefore, when I hear people and they've got, I don't know, I remember the Alan Titchmarsh garden design program or something like that, and they're knocking out designs for 150 quid. I think is awful, and I think it's purely with the intention of building it, and it's giving the clients a sort of cheap option. I don't think anything it's not developing design, it's not pushing the boundaries of possibility, and I think, therefore, it's no good for the industry. It's going to suit some people's budgets, maybe, but I also don't think we're doing any favours by, I think a worse practice is offering, no matter what the cost of the design is, much worse practice is saying, oh, by the way, we knock the design fee off if you go with the build. I think, why? You've paid for something, you've done the design, why are you doing that for free? Or you're not doing it for free and you're simply adding it onto the cost of the build anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. James, you must feel a similar way.
Yeah, we work same way to David. It's a completely separate fee. We treat it as a separate business, and yeah, we never refund it, and we're always clear about that. And we explain it so that we value design, and we don't want any hidden costs. We're upfront and clear about all our costs. And I think if you're actually going down that line with a client and they're really pushing to get the design feedback, it probably means they don't really value the design. So maybe it's just not meant to be anyway.
Absolutely. We've had another question through that says, who manages the tender process and is it chargeable? Does anyone want to tackle that? I see, Rosemary, you have commented back to that one.
Yeah, no, I manage the tender process as a designer, and I select the contractors, get the quotes, and I, depending on the job and the complexity, if they're more complex, I'll table them up, and if they've quoted back as per my specification, I can table costs across from each contractor. And that makes it easier to sit down with the client and go through, where the costs are, where the big costs are, where there might be savings. And I charge for the process, yeah, because it takes time. It can take a lot of hours to get through. So, and that the client's saving that ultimately in the end, especially on large projects. They're going to save that by choosing the best contractor for the job. Might not be the cheapest, but they'll be the best contractor. So, yeah.
Thank you, Rosemary. I think I might have cut out a little bit there, but we have another question for you. What tips do you, I suppose, the panel have for a designer building a relationship with a contractor? I mean, where did you start, I suppose, in building a successful partnership?
What, with me? I mean, I think you have to take a stab in the dark, and at the very beginning, it's very hard. It's looking around and seeing, if you've not worked with any contractors, then it's looking around, seeing who's working locally in your area. If you see their sign, check out their website, have a look at their work, start that way, ask for recommendations from other designers or other people in the industry. And then also just, take a stab in the dark. There's one contractor I started working with years ago. I thought they'd say no, but they said yes. And it's been a great partnership ever since. So, you just got to take a risk, but communication all the time, good communication.
Absolutely. Pete, how about from a contractor side?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, take a leap of faith really, and have a go. You just won't know any other way. I think I said in the session that, unless you get round the table and find out if it'll work, you'll never know. And you've got to do that. And so my advice is really just to, again, dip your toe in, see what the temperature's like, and if it's all right, then take it forward. But you'll soon know if it's not right for you both. But there are people out there. Contractors are not all scary people, and we know designers aren't either. So, but we do need each other. So otherwise we can't do what we want to do. So yeah, definitely just try and get out there and talk to contractors, and don't be frightened. I also saw a note on the feed about and I think David answered this, and he said just be honest about your abilities from both sides, contractors and designers at the outset. Just say, actually, do you know what, this is my first job, or this is the biggest job I've ever built, or I've never built this before this way, or just have those conversations. Don't sit out and go, oh yeah, that's great, and then go back to your office and think, oh, I've got to try and do something, I've got no idea what I'm doing. Just have the conversations, because you never know, the other person might be thinking exactly the same thing. So but certainly yeah, just be honest from the outset. Absolutely.
Agree with that. I think also, as a new designer, I remember, I mean, it's quite a few years ago now, but there's some contractors I worked with, and I thought, we're not a good fit, we're not going to carry on together. And but I think that thing about asking questions, because you just learn so much as soon as you start building, and that just as soon as you say, look, I've done this, I've spec'd it this way, but I'm not sure if that's the best way. What would you suggest? And, you know,
I would reiterate that it is all about communication, but communication doesn't necessarily mean lots and lots of communication. It's about trying to get across what you need to say, would be your plans and your specifications, actually in as few lines and words as possible. When we're tendering, we find it actually quite difficult when you get a sort of Bible of information that you've got to wade through, especially if you don't need it, to read through pages and pages of specification, you know, about temperatures and so on, that you can do something in to get to actually make sure you don't miss the critical bit. So actually, you know, it can be a really simple sketch. It doesn't have to be lots and lots of drawings. So trying to actually keep it simple as well, I think, is quite important. Don't try and impress by the amount of paperwork you throw at a contractor.
There's a note on that, as if you are using the header specification, just make sure you take out the bits that are not relevant to the job.
Yes, yeah.
We've just had another question come through, although before I answer that, I've been told to say that FutureScape has just been mentioned on Radio 2, which is absolutely fantastic. So the next question I have is, in the tender process, do you ask for an equality and inclusion policy from people bidding on the tenders?
No.
Take that.
Perhaps we should.
Yeah.
We've also had quite a few questions around an SGD advice for the design fee, whether it's still available, whether you use this particular advice. Jane, do you want to take that one?
Well, I'm not sure if it's still around. I should know more about this, because I served on SGD Council for 4 years until a few years ago, and I think this. We have to get this confirmed by the SGD, but I think the SGD stopped doing it because they felt that it wasn't their place to sort of control how somebody charged for their time or the process. There were lots of different ways you could do it that could all be correct. So I think they withdrew it.
I think it has been withdrawn as well, because it's quite a few years ago that I think it got withdrawn. But again, need to double check with SGD.
A little bit of homework for all of us after this, I think. And one question, which I know you did answer, I think, James, later on down, but I do think it's quite interesting to know whether you transitioned from build to design or the other way around.
So I studied at Mareswood. I did their 3-year diploma, and when I left, I was lucky enough to get a job as a designer working in North London. So I did that for a couple of years before setting up the business that I've got now, which I said at the beginning is just about me going 30 years. And through that business, really, to actually make it work and make it pay, most of the sort of financial side of the business was being a contractor, building gardens, doing maintenance. And my sort of love really though was designing, and I've been very fortunate that as a business has grown, I've managed to sort of go back more into a designer manager role for the business. So it's sort of transgression. It's always been my interest, but I built a business which sort of financially was about building gardens more than being a designer. But in the last, maybe the last 10 years or so, the business probably has built more of a reputation for design. So I've transitioned back. Well, I consider myself a designer now more than a contractor, although 80% of our turnover is still as a contractor, not design fees.
And I think, David, most people will know your route round, but I still think it's quite interesting to know which you did first, build and design, and how you evolved between the two.
Well, the course I did was a 3-year national diploma at Merris Wood, and it was landscape design and construction. And so design was, we were taught by the great landscape architect Pat McCann of my generation, and very, very fortunate. And so what I did, we trained as draftsmen. It was all still done on the drawing board then, which is good discipline. And I think that a lot of the computer drawings produced now, you still need to hand draw in the sense that you feel for the design. But the people who work on our design team now, they're all Vectorworks, SketchUp, AutoCAD, and essentially I'll sort of scribble something out the drawing board and make that look pretty. But then we work as a team, as the design side of it. But no, I started off design and build, and then we sort of moved more into, suddenly designers started approaching us just for our build, and we liked it, and we still do like it. And I think now we're going back much more into, we set up a design practice with Joe Perkins, Longview Design, and Joe then moved on, so we closed that business down, and the outdoor room therefore has gone much more back into design and build. And the balance between doing that now and working with other designers is fantastic. I really, really enjoy it. But I would say we've always had a design team in the background.
I mean, there's a really interesting question here, and it might just open up a can of worms, but somebody's commented that they have been designing gardens for the last 15 years, but they don't have qualifications for design, which makes them feel that they can't charge for this service. I mean, how would any of you feel about that?
I think that so many. So what if you do nine months, essentially a year-long course, suddenly you're catapulted into the great world of being a recognised and established designer? No, I think that person's got 15 years experience. If they're producing quality work, one of my best foremen never went to college, and yet he's one of the most skilled guys I know. Qualifications are good. We all like a bit of paper on the wall, but I think suddenly there seems to be this process within the design industry of, you do a short course and suddenly you're accepted. I think that there are other design and build people who are better designers than designers, in the sense that they just don't sort of want to win. And I think a lot of that is led by the RHS. And I think the RHS sort of always want to big up the designer, and the contractor is slightly the, the forgotten party. And they try and give the best construction award, which is nice. But I think it's a teamwork, which makes a good garden. And design input from the contractor is as important as the actual concept itself. It's not a design unless you know how it's going to be built.
Would anyone disagree with any of that?
No, I would agree completely. I think certainly for me, what I know now is so much greater than what I ever learned at college. So I think there are, I mean, I'm sure there are designers in the industry that don't have formal design training. So I wouldn't have that much sort of stock in the qualifications of an experienced designer. And like David, with our build teams, some of them have come from construction industry, but my top guys haven't been to college. They didn't study it. They actually learned it through long service with the garden company. And we've been really lucky. We've got guys that have been, team leaders have been with us for 15 years or so. And none of my key people actually studied. We'd love to get more people through from the colleges, but we find it quite difficult.
Rosemary, somebody has said that they still do hand drawing. They still do hand drawings, and they want to know how landscapers feel about this. So Pete, I will ask you how you feel about this as well. But is it something that you still do, or do you only use CAD?
I only use CAD, and I made the change quite swiftly after I'd sort of finished studying, simply because if I was working with an architect or a builder or something, and I was getting drawings in and there were changes, and you're working with lots of sort of different disciplines, it just made it much faster. Also, probably, I know I'm not as great a drawer as Helen is, who's asked the question, because she draws beautifully. So yeah, I sort of linked to my school, which was learn a computer program quickly. So yeah, you know, for me and where my business is and who I work with, it saves time to be on CAD. But I don't think it's necessary, as long as you're happy with the time that it's taking doing it, and you can communicate it well.
Our designs always start by being sketched out by hand, but quite quickly they go into CAD. So often me or somebody else will sketch out a scheme, and then we have somebody that puts it in CAD in the office. So normally by the time the client sees it, the first draft is a CAD version. It always starts by hand.
Okay, so a process that you go through. Pete, how do contractors feel about hand drawings compared to CAD?
I think it's quite simple. If the information is clear enough and there's enough information, you can draw it exactly however you wish. However, there probably will come a point where, as Rosemary said, when you're having to interact with other people, architects or other design houses within a larger project or as part of a project, then they're going to expect them in a different format, so there will be a limitation from that side of things. But, and again, as Rosemary said, if you're happy with the time it takes, then there's no problem with that. But it is about clarity and making sure that you can get your point across through your drawings. If they're hand drawn, that's fine. As a contractor, as long as they're clear, that's no problem. But yeah, it is about making sure the information is there, whatever format it comes in.
Interesting.
We've, in fact, probably one of our largest projects in 2020 was hand drawn. So yeah, and it was a reasonable sized, domestic construction project was done on hand drawing. And to be fair, it's a stunner. So yeah, there's definitely still room for it.
I'm sure that's really good to know. And there's also a question about sustainability when selecting hard landscaping materials. Is this something that comes into it for most of you now?
Yes.
Yeah. You go, David.
No, absolutely. We look at where materials are sourced from. I mean, I was looking at, I was in Indonesia back in January, looking at the sustainability of furniture we supply. I've been to India looking at sustainability of stone. I think it's absolutely critical. Speak to reputable suppliers of stone as well. Look at forestry stewardship for timber, but always use a reputable supplier is absolutely critical to us from a design and build point of view.
I mean, an added point on this question was it would be interesting to hear if clients are interested in the difference between UK natural stone versus imported, and if this has any influence on the final decision. So are clients taking it on board?
I personally haven't had any clients ask, but yet, but I think it is something that will be coming. I don't know if anyone else has.
Not in as much as hard landscape materials, but plants and trees and various, sourcing and sustainability of plants and UK stock. I've had a client recently who has been quite firm about that, but which is actually really good, and it does make you do some work actually, rather than going back to because you have to follow the client's wishes, and it's easy to do things the way you always do them, isn't it? And it was nice to be able to solve the problem, but it was I think it was around elm trees that we had a problem, so they wanted English elm, so that was interesting. So but not for hard landscape materials. Thankfully, a lot of that work now, as long as your supply chain is has the right outlook, a lot of that sustainability and is dealt with before it gets to the contractor. For us, it's something that we're quite fortunate to be given rather than have to pursue too much. But in terms of hard landscape materials, clients haven't had any comments to me either, really.
We'll often try and specify locally sourced materials and so on. Local oaks, there's a National Trust property not far from us that supplies oak, for instance, and we'll often try and move things that way, and try and sort of explain to the client as an advantage of the material. Often cost gets in the way, but I think, as Pete and David have both said, fortunately, hopefully that you can then fall back on a really good supplier network, and the big names in this industry that we all know for stone and so on, I know do a lot of work to make sure that their products are ethically supplied and so on. So we are sort of partly in their hands, I suppose, but I think it is key that you are buying through really good suppliers, and you maybe make sure you're doing your own bit of homework to make sure the suppliers are signed up to the right organisations that they should be.
Do you think it's just asking the right questions then to suppliers to ensure that that's the case?
Yeah.
Yep.
We've just got a few minutes left on this one. I can see one question that says, do you need to include construction detail drawings in for a tender? Pete, did you want to answer that one?
Yes, please. Yes. If you want to, well, it depends if you want an even playing field, level playing field, I guess. If you don't give us construction drawings, everyone will build it the way they think you want it built. And therefore, you are likely to get a myriad of different options. The easiest way, the clearest way is for us to have those construction details when we're pricing the work. It's the only way to be sure that everyone's pricing the same thing. Again, I'll go back to what we said earlier. If you want conversations about construction detailing, then have them with a contractor. If you're unsure, have them with a contractor and find a way to build them. And everyone will help. I'm sure we're pretty nice people in this industry. We're nice to each other, aren't we? So we can talk things through. And so, yeah, if you're struggling, just talk to people. But yeah, from a contractor's point of view, yes, please, as much information as you can give us, but concisely, obviously. As James's point earlier, we don't like reams of paper, do we, really?
We always put construction in our own design build. We always have construction drawings because we want to tell our teams how to build something, although we may have done something very similar. There's often a little tweak or a little bit of difference that you want to incorporate, and it's not just necessarily the construction; it's the design detail you want as well. So if you don't communicate how you want it, then the chances are you won't get it how you intended. So that's what the drawings should convey.
I think so. It's all those connections. If you're doing walls and steps and paving, you've got to understand fully how
where everything meets.
Yeah, where everything meets. No funny gaps end up in the wrong place. So.
Yeah, it's the detailing. If you want the detailing, then show how it's done. And again, as Pete said, it's down to tendering. Am I still blanked out?
You are, David. I don't know how to get your video up. I'm sorry.
No, don't worry. I usually like to get naked at this time of the afternoon anyway. It's lucky for you. It's but going back to Pete. It's if you want a fair tender, or if there's any specific detail you want, then it's absolutely critical. You show that, and again, as Pete says, have that conversation. It's again, we seem to be more generous with our time. Once we know we've got the job, and then you can start to, if it's ballpark figures, fine, we can look at that any other way. But then when you get down to the nitty gritty, have those conversations in more detail once you've won the tender. Because the contractor may well have a brilliant way of achieving exactly the look the designer is wanting, but isn't too sure how to achieve that. But again, it's don't give away your knowledge for now.
Yeah. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'll just ask one more question on here. That somebody was wondering whether everybody designs to a budget or a brief, and whether this differs between designers and designer build companies. So James, did you want to answer that one?
Yeah, we tend to design to a brief. So, and I still don't really know the best way to handle budgets right at the beginning of the project. So I'm really sorry, I can't really help on the best way to go there, but we have a way that we do it, which is we try and listen really, really carefully to the client, and then we write up a brief, and that sort of, should be a good checklist for them from actual items they want in the garden, but also that the sort of the feel of it that we're trying to sort of get across to them. And then if they want to talk budgets, we will, but we will often explain it that, look, we've got this brief now, we've got a good feel for what you want to achieve. Let's design the garden that's right for you. Let's do it in the most, use our skills to do that in the most economical way, but get the garden right first. And then if you've got to sort of, hone it back a bit for a budget, then we can take things out and adapt it. When we have a budget, the problem we sometimes find, or often find, is that the budget isn't enough, and therefore you've got to start off designing something that doesn't fulfil the brief, and that somehow feels sort of less satisfying than designing it and then having to go through what's quite a normal process of adapting the design to save costs, but we're quite happy to go through that process if we need to. So we find that sort of works for us, rather than trying to, I know other designers will say, first question, what's your budget? We don't work that way. But I'm interested to know how other people do it.
So am I. Rosemary?
I do ask budget, I think, but maybe it's because I'm a Kiwi and I'll get that awkward question out there at the beginning. But sometimes too, when I'm on the phone speaking to people, because if they say 10 grand, then I know I'm not the right designer for them. So, and I've quite often over the sort of, since March and the change of way of working, I've had a lot of people say they have got a specific budget. And I will take Google Earth map and measure it from their site and say, look, it's X, take say, 30% hard landscaping, 60% soft, and it's X amount per square metre. That's already going to exceed your budget. We have to be realistic. So it sort of weeds out some people who I know I can't, build for them properly, design for them properly. Others, I've had some which have a realistic budget, but we have to be very careful about detailings. They're on the wish list as a water feature, and I'd say, well, it'd be lovely to put in, but that's not going to make it, because what you want is 10 grand for that water feature. So I think it's, but still getting them a garden that they want and that is beautiful and is well designed. So it's, and some of them will say, oh no, actually I'll find the money, or we'll phase it, design it in, and we'll build it later. But normally I'd approached it from, as James did, take the brief and I'll design you the garden you'll want. I found this year people are a lot more price conscious and very aware of what their budget limit is, and they want to stick to that. So we've worked a bit harder, perhaps getting ballparks from contractors after the concept's drawn up, and then say, look, we're on track or we're not on track, and then sort of go forward. And then some cases you just don't get a budget given to you, so that's fine, you just design it. So And then work backwards quite often. So, yeah.
We have about 1 minute left. Did anyone have any closing remarks at all for anything that they've read on the comments or anything we've spoken about so far? Oh, well, that's good to hear. Sorry if none of your questions didn't get answered. You've got all of the speakers' names, so feel free to harass them via their websites and emails. I'm sure they'd be really happy with that.
I was going to say, because there are a few, there's about, choosing a contract and things. I mean, just email me and I'll answer, give you.
Maybe one for a feature in the magazine as well. Thank you very much.
If you can help in any way.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Still quite a few seminars to view for the rest of the week, right until Thursday afternoon. So look forward to seeing some of you in the next few.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nina.
It's been very interesting.
It has.
Very interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.
Bye.
I can get dressed now.